Hi everyone, welcome back to Learning Bridge. I hope you guys are doing good and staying safe. So guys, I have crossed 500 subscribers on my channel today. I am feeling really amazing because it was such a big milestone for me.
इतनी खुशी इतनी खुशी इतनी खुशी मुझे आज तक नहीं हुई।
So first of all, a really big thanks to each and everyone for all the love and support. बस इसी तरह से प्यार करते रहो यार. So the topic of today's video is designing scalable systems. So watch this video till the end because this topic is going to be really important to crack the tech giant interviews. For this session, we have a very special guest, Mr. Alpesh Rathore. He is working as a senior technical lead in Paytm. So in this session, he has discussed about his journey from IIT Bombay to Paytm, how to design a scalable system, what is system designing, cap theorem, load balancing, types of caching, and real-time applications using Apache Kafka.
अल्लाह माफ करे, बहुत मनुष्य लग रहे हो, मत करो।
Before starting the session, if you guys are new to my channel, then take a moment to subscribe the channel and press the notification icon so that you can get the notification for my latest videos. So without wasting time, let's jump on to the session.
So, hi Alpesh, welcome to the channel. First of all, thank you very much for taking your time for this session. Let's begin with the session. First, I would ask you to introduce yourself and how has your journey been so far in IT industry doing your masters from IIT Bombay.
Thanks, Shashank. First of all, a big thanks for inviting me on this show. So my journey began at IIT Bombay, as you said. I completed my MTech in 2013 batch. After that, I joined Opera Solutions. For a brief amount of time, I think we were both in Opera Solutions.
Yeah.
Therein, we were, I was part of the software team. And we were also involved in different types of projects there, got a good exposure of big data technologies there, as well as backend software development. Although I would say most of my journey had been mostly backend software development, and had a couple of projects in big data technologies as well, right? And that's where I got this kickstart of backend development. And then I was really interested in these types of challenging problems we face in backend development projects. So after completing around 4.5 years in Opera, I was looking out for a little bit more challenging tasks and different types of tasks, because there are different types of projects that we get in Opera. We were mostly client based, wherein we used to focus mostly on one client, requirements of one client, whereas in companies like Paytm, which I joined later on, we are mostly focused on scale and B2C kind of products. So
Yeah.
that's when I joined Paytm, and I've been working there for around 2.5 years now, and currently I'm senior tech lead at Paytm.
Now let's start with our system designing questionnaire. First question to you is what is system designing and its key characteristics?
Considering the system designing as a term itself, it has a very vast scope. Number one. So initially, when web apps were only starting to come in the market, most of the web apps were developed in monolithic kind of architecture. So you would see there would be a single Spring based application or maybe servlet based application, and it would be running on some web server like Tomcat or something, and there would be a client, and it would be throwing requests to the backend, and backend would be doing some database transactions and giving responses back to the browser or the client. So that was the kind of architecture initially, the kind of design initially were that were common in those days. Most important reason was that web apps started to really bloom, and the people were really using internet a lot in the last 7 to 8 years, and hence there was a requirement of enhancing our designs. So after that, SOA kind of architectures came in, service-oriented architectures, and then other type of architectures started coming in. And also from the database perspective, the most important part of any application was database, because or even if you break your application in different parts, all of them might be accessing the same database, right?
Yeah.
And hence databases started becoming single point of failure. So there was a need to make the databases distributed themselves as well as the applications, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I came across this whole new field of computer science called distributed systems. That's how the journey of system designing has been.
Okay, so let's move on to our next question, because you talked about a distributed system. So What is CAP theorem in context of distributed systems?
Okay, first of all, we'll go to the theoretical definition of what CAP theorem is.
Okay.
So CAP theorem is basically C stands for consistency, A stands for availability, and P stands for partition tolerance. All right.
Okay.
So according to CAP theorem, you cannot have all these three things supported by a distributed system, right? Now it's a very
Right.
very strict claim to make,
Yeah.
but yes, if you really go into the details of how distributed systems work, you would really realize that you can only pick two out of them at most,
Right.
right? So first of all, let's see what C is. Consistency is. Consistency means that whatever request you make to any node in a distributed system, it should return the same output as the last write operation. Right. So basically,
Okay.
the data should be consistent. So because we are talking about distributed systems here, we are having a cluster of nodes, right? And you can make a request to any node. Being a client, you can make a request to any node for load balancing. Hence, if you make a request to a node X, a write request to X and read request to Y, the Y node should be consistent with the X node. Right?
Okay.
So that's what consistency means. Second is availability. Availability means that you always get a response, right?
Right.
So it does not happen that you made a query and it never came back. So has to be a response from the cluster altogether. And the last one is partition tolerance. Partition tolerance means that if there are some nodes which have lost communication with other nodes, then it should not impact the entire cluster. So the client should not know whether a node was detached from the cluster. So these are the three terms. There's a good proof. It's not mathematical, but there's a good proof that these three things cannot exist together.
Okay. Let's move on to our next question. We will talk about different characteristics or components used in system designing. So, what is load balancing?
Okay, yeah. So it's actually a very standard phenomenon now, and a lot of frameworks are providing it out of the box, right? For example, AWS, any cloud platform that you go for, mostly has a load balancers in place, and you can just click and apply load balancing on your nodes. But on the crux of it, it is basically you have an application, and there are requests coming to it. Now, what if there is a spike in the number of requests? Then the application will start consuming a lot of CPU and memory, right?
Right.
And eventually it will crash. So load balancing basically means you should be able to have multiple nodes running at the same time, and the request should be sent in a round should be made in a round robin method to all the nodes. And then there are other concepts as well. So one is basically a constant load balancing, wherein you dump all the nodes that are required for the spikes, and you keep balancing the requests among them. And there is also a concept of elastic load balancing, wherein you add nodes only when they're required, right? So that requires a little bit configurations, like when a node CPU has gone above 40%, let's say, then you add a new node. And if all the CPUs are below 40%, then you remove one of the nodes. So there are configurations that you can make, and mostly all the cloud platforms now have load balancing out of the box.
So my next question to you is, what is caching in system designing?
Okay, another very commonly used term, but not understood at all the levels that it should be. So caching is basically one of the most important performance boosters that you can have in your application, right? And also it's very tricky to have it right.
Okay.
So caching can be done at various levels throughout your application. Number one, the very first, I would go it from bottom up approach. So
Yeah.
the very first level of caching that you can have is in your databases, right? Because I think in most of the cases, what I have seen, at least in my projects, is that one request on your application converts into 2 to 3 requests on databases, queries on the databases, right? So if your TPS is 100, if your application is receiving 100 requests per second, then your database might be receiving at least 200 to 300 queries per second, right?
Exactly.
So it's very important that it's very important to boost the performance of databases itself, right? So even once we had around 500 TPS at our application. and we saw that our Elasticsearch was getting around 6 to 7,000 queries per second. So that is the
Okay.
kind of factor that databases are handling. So yeah, so it becomes really important. The caching factor becomes very important. So there are some built-in caching mechanisms given out of the box by various RDBMSs and NoSQLs, which are really inherent to the databases and take really a deep understanding of databases to understand themselves.
Okay.
But yes, they do try to optimize as much as possible, right? So they try to cache the queries and then cache the results. And if you fire the same query again, they give the cache results and all, right? More important than that is the application level caching, right? So uh, let's say you are firing the same query again and again to the database, right?
Okay.
And the database is actually caching and giving the results back to you, right, within a fraction of a millisecond. But still you are making the query, right? So the network communication is still happening. So
Yeah.
why not cache the results at your end itself, and even save the database call, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, so that is the application level caching that people do. Another kind of application level caching that people do is kind of a very small data set, which changes very infrequently, right? Uh, for example, let's say you have categories. In one of our projects, we had categories, and those categories were database driven, but they rarely used to change, right?
Okay.
So what we would do is at the time of application startup itself, we would load that in memory and only query the memory. And as soon as there was a change in the categories list, we would clear that cache off and reload it from the database.
Okay.
Even some frameworks like Spring have some out of the box caching as well. So if you add a cacheable annotation on top of a method, then what it does is if you pass the same arguments to a method, then it will cache, and it won't
Okay.
call the method itself next time. So
All right.
some frameworks also give that kind of caching, and I found this really useful. So basically, what we used to do is that if the database query was being made from inside a method, we would just mark it as cacheable, right? So
Okay.
if the same parameters are called, the Spring would cache it, right?
It's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that is one of the cool features that some frameworks have. I have used it in Spring, and pretty much sure other frameworks might be giving it as well. And then there are cachings at web server level also. So if let's say if you're using Nginx or Tomcat, then they give some level of caching, wherein if the API request that they are getting has the same parameters and body and everything, then they cache the result and do not call your controller or your API logic, the application's logic, right? So that is another level of caching. And then the final level of caching is on the client side itself. So the client itself knows what request it is making. So it might cache some results if it knows that it is going to make the same request later on.
Okay. So my next question to you is Alpesh, what is reverse proxy and why to use Nginx?
All right. So number one, it's not necessary to use Nginx in all the use cases. What I have seen is that people tend to use Nginx irrespective of whether it is required or not. Number one,
Okay.
and they normally use it for reverse proxy. Um, so again, if you really need Nginx, there are really cool use cases that Nginx solves for you. But again, it's not 100% required in all the cases. So reverse proxying is basically you have a layer sitting in front, right, of your application, and it is taking all the requests from all the clients, and then
Okay.
depending on the request patterns, it decides where the request should go and who should serve the request. Okay.
Okay.
So let's say there is a microservice kind of an architecture, and there are like 5 to 6 microservices running. What you would do is you would have a Nginx sitting on top, which is taking all the requests, and then depending on the request patterns, that if it is /account, then maybe it goes to the account service. If it is /auth, then it goes to the auth service. So the logic of having various services and then having a common layer sitting on top becomes really simple if you use a reverse proxy like Nginx. And your
Okay.
another question is what is the use of Nginx? Definitely one of them is reverse proxy. People also use it for other purposes. For example, they use it for caching, the last thing that we saw, and they also use it for rate limiting, Rate limiting means if you're getting a really sudden spike in the request, which might be due to some hacker, then it starts dropping some of the requests so that the application is not hampered.
Okay. Okay, Alpesh. Let's move on to next question related to the requests and responses. What is long polling WebSockets and server sent events?
Okay, they are mostly used for keeping a connection alive. If you look at from the broader perspective, basically when the HTTP was initially used for only web pages, serving web pages, then at that time what they used to do is that browser used to make a connection to its web server,
Okay.
and it would download a HTML web page, and the page would be mostly static initially, and it was done. For the next button that you click, it would make another request, and for that it would establish a new connection, right? So that's how it used to work initially. But later on, as Ajax requests came in, wherein browser would download the page and then execute JavaScript, and then from inside the JavaScript, you are again calling some Ajax API request to the backend server. At that time, what happened that every time a request was called, a new connection was being made, right?
Yeah.
So for such, even let's say for chat applications, what it would do is that client would regularly ping the server that okay, has a new message come in, every 1 second or so. So it had a lot of disadvantages. Obviously, it had to make a new connection every time. And secondly, for real-time use cases, for example, online gaming, wherein even milliseconds matter. At that time, this kind of polling could not work because you're making requests every 1 second, and let's say if the other player that you're playing with has clicked a fire button before you, you will only get that update 1 second later.
Yeah.
In worst case, and in average case 500 milliseconds, right? So those kinds of approaches did not work, and also it took a lot of time to establish the connection itself. So these kind of concepts started coming in, like long polling, wherein server did not respond did not close the connection. So client and server did not close the connection, and they used to communicate for a longer period of time instead of closing the connection every time.
Okay.
And similarly, WebSockets and server sent events keep the connection open for a longer period of time, and they keep communicating among themselves.
Okay, Alpesh. I mean, that's really good to know about the differences between these requests and responses methodologies. Okay, so let's move on to our next question that is related to our real-time processing. So what is Kafka and why it is being used in real-time scenarios?
Okay, really good question, because what I have seen is that not a lot of people are using Kafka nowadays. Although more and more people are, but I still feel that in a real-time application, it becomes really important to have a queuing mechanism like Kafka at a lot of places. So I would try to explain it in a very naive term. So basically, let's say if you have an application, and there are requests coming to the application. And this application, what it does is it makes some database requests, it makes some API calls behind the scenes, and then collaborates all the responses and gives a single response to the client, right?
Okay.
In this is a very common scenario. But what happens is that if the number of requests are going high, right? If the number of requests per second becomes really high, if the application which is sitting and making the database calls and API calls becomes a bottleneck, because this is the single point of contact, and then it is making different calls, right? So what happens is that sometimes when this application becomes blocked, your application tends to crash. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So what is the normal? So the client should not know that there is a lot of load on the backend, and backend is making a lot of calls to the database. It doesn't care, right?
Right.
So what we do is so Kafka is used for two use cases, I would say. One is resilience, the one that I was discussing right now, and second is queuing, which we'll see later on. So main use case of Kafka is resilience. Right? So resilience means what the front application sitting and taking requests from the client does is that it only takes the requests and makes a a small packet, or you can say a small message, and puts it in a queue.
Okay.
Right? And tells the client that I have taken a request and it will be processed, right? So in a way, it is making the whole process asynchronous, right?
All right.
So it is very important to make a process asynchronous if, number one, the process itself is very long, if it takes a lot of time to complete, and secondly, you do not want the client to be waiting, or client to know that the server has blocked, because there
Okay.
were too many requests and the process was taking too long and all. So very important thing to make a system resilient is to make it asynchronous. And
Okay.
there is another thing to consider here. It's not always that you can make a system asynchronous. There are use cases where it is important to make it synchronous also,
Okay.
right? But in the places where you can make it asynchronous, you should try to make it asynchronous using some queue like Kafka. So how do you do it through Kafka? Kafka is basically a cluster. It is installed on 2 or 3 nodes, and the IP addresses are shared.
Okay.
And as soon as a request comes to the application, what it does is it makes a small packet or message wherein all the parameters of the requests are saved, put in, and it is thrown to the Kafka.
Okay.
What Kafka does is it stores the packet intermittently to itself, right?
Okay.
And then there are some other applications or other services which are listening to these packets, right?
Okay.
Okay, so as soon as a packet comes, the other listening application will pick it up and process it, and then intimate the first application that my job is complete now, right?
Okay.
And this intimation can also be through Kafka in the reverse direction, or it can be through API call or whatever, right?
Okay. Right.
And second thing is why Kafka itself is resilient, because it is taking all the packets then, so it should become the single point of failure then, right?
Yeah.
So earlier our application was taking all the requests and sending it to other services. Now Kafka is taking all the packets and sending it. So now why this one doesn't become single point of failure? Because Kafka itself is not processing, right? It is
Yeah.
only storing the packets intermittently. And second thing it does is, since it is running in cluster mode, what it can do is it can load balance all the packets.
Yeah.
So let's say if you have 5 nodes running, and all 5 of them are listening to the Kafka, what Kafka will do is it will give one message to one node and do it in round robin,
Okay.
right? So now you have balanced your load using Kafka.
Right.
So these are the two main use cases when Kafka is used.
Okay. So like it basically decouples your application and then obviously doing the things for
Load
the
balancing.
real-time systems. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alpesh, for giving your insights about the system designing concepts. I guess this is going to be really useful for those who are into system designing or who basically facing issues while implementing these components in their systems.
So that's it for today's session, guys. I hope you guys like this session with Alpesh on system designing. If you guys liked it, then do like and share the video, and don't forget to subscribe the channel for the latest videos. If you have any questions related to system designing, then put your questions in the comment section. I will be answering those questions as well. And if you guys have any interesting topic which you want me to cover in my next videos, then do comment that. And if anybody is interested to deliver a tech talk on a particular topic, then reach out to me. I would be really happy to feature you on my channel. Till then, stay safe and stay tuned.